In this video, I'll be showing how I put this rendering together and how I did the lighting with an HDRI, a video clip for the fire, an image texture for the TV, and a sunlight and a few area lights. So here's my scene file, and I'll start at the bottom and work my way up. So this is my ground plane, which is just a plane that I subdivided quite a few times. And then I added a subdivision surface modifier. And this material is actually a mixture of two different textures that I found on Polyhaven. And I have links to those in the description if you want to download them. One is a rocky ground texture, and the other one is asphalt. And I mixed them together with a mixed shader node and a noise texture to modulate between them. And I used the displacement map from the rocky texture to give it some variation in height. And then I added this second plane and gave it a glass material so it looks like standing water, and it also helps to break up any repetition in the ground material. Next, I downloaded some free models from Sketchfab. I got this trash dumpster, the chair, and this TV stand. And these models were already set up with their textures applied, but the dumpster was way too reflective. As you can see, if I remove the color ramp, it's way too shiny and reflective. So I added the color ramp, and that made it look a lot better. For the TV stand, I did the same thing. I added a color ramp, and I also added this RGB curves node and the hue saturation node to fade the color and reduce the saturation, to make it look sort of old, like it's been sitting out in the sun. And for the chair, I actually added quite a bit because it was way too clean and nice looking. So I added dirt and grunge to make it look like it's been outside in the elements for a while. Next, I added this building that I also found on Sketchfab, and the link is in the description. It's actually two separate pieces, but there's a seam where the two halves come together. So I made this simple column to hide that. Then I added these chunks of concrete and rocks and all the scattered debris, which came from a pack that I bought on ArtStation a while ago. So I just scattered stuff around to make it look broken down and deserted. I don't have a link for this stuff, but if you search on ArtStation, you can find a lot of stuff for sale. And then finally, I added some of my own models. The pallets, the barrel, this little milk crate, and the TV, which is pretty basic because the render is dark and the TV is sitting far back from the camera, so there was no reason to go crazy with a lot of details. So that's it for the scene setup. For the lighting, I have an HDRI loaded, and right now I have the strength set to 1 so you can see everything. And this one that I'm using is called Abandoned Slipway that I got from Polyhaven. I use this one for most of my projects because it has really soft lighting, without any bright spots or dark shadows. There's a link to the download page in the description if you want to grab it. So I'm going to set the strength to 0.1, which makes it pretty dark. So I wanted to add just a little bit of a moonlight effect, so I added a sunlight. And I set the strength to 0.5 and the color to a desaturated blue, and that seems to work pretty well. Next, I added a light for the fire. But first I should probably show how I set up the fire. If I switch to solid shading, you see I have two planes. I made this first one and I curved it slightly. Then I made a copy, moved it back, and scaled it down a little bit. And for the fire, it's actually a video clip that I downloaded for free from Vecteezy. And there's a link in the description if you want to download the same clip. And if I come down to the node editor, you see it's just a material output with an emission shader and a transparent BSDF plugged into a mixed shader node. Then I dropped the video clip in here and plugged it into the emission and the mixed shader like this. I set the emission strength to 3, and I enabled cyclic and auto refresh because I was thinking about rendering out a video, but I never did. And for the smaller plane, let me delete this material and come back over to this one select everything, right-click and copy, then go back to the smaller plane, click New to create a new material, select these two nodes and delete them, then right-click and paste the material from the other plane. And now the only problem is they're both exactly the same, which might not be that big of a deal. If I switch to camera view, you can't really tell. But if you want this smaller one to be different, you can adjust the start frame value until you get something you like. And I think I set this one to about 76. So that's it for the flames, but I want the fire to illuminate the building back here. So I added this area light pointing at the wall, and I scaled it down so it fit inside the barrel. Then I set the power to 5, and the color to a light orange, and the spread to 120 degrees. Now for the TV screen, I did an image search and found this image of Big Brother, so I dropped it into the shader editor, plugged it into an emission node, set the strength to 2, and then plugged the emission into the material output node. But that's not really enough to get the look that I wanted. So I added an area light with the power set to 10 and the color to a light grayish blue. And I set the spread to 30 degrees so it will only project light forward instead of trying to spread light in a full 180 degrees. And I wanted to put the light inside the TV behind the screen, but when I do that, it gets blocked by the screen. So back here in the material, I added a principled BSDF and a light path node. I plugged Is Camera Ray into the alpha input on the BSDF node. Then I plugged the BSDF node into the bottom input on a mixed shader node, and the emission shader into the top input, and then plugged the mixed shader into the material output node. And that will let the light pass through the screen, which you'll see in a minute, because the last thing I need to do is add some fog. So I created this cube, which you can see here in solid shading, and I made it big enough to fit everything inside. Then in the material editor, I created a new material, deleted the principled BSDF, and added a principled volume. The color is a light gray, and I set the density to 0.01, and the anisotropy to 0.7. So now when I switch to render display, you see I have a very light fog, and you can see the light coming out of the screen. And as I mentioned before, if I come back over to the screen material and plug the emission straight into the material output, you see the light is getting blocked by the screen. So if you want light to pass through an object, you need to use the light path node. And that's about it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and post them below. And if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.